Friends, if you're looking for real old school laughs, you're in for a treat because we've got them right here. Flip City Magazine. Remember Mad Magazine? Then it went woke? Well, don't worry. Flip City has no chance of going woke. That's right. 4 times a year, you'll get an actual printed magazine full of jokes, stories, comics, and more, all about today's pop culture, entertainment, and woke politics. Flip City takes terrible entertainment trends we love to hate with hilarious parodies of Lord of the Rings, Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, Star Trek, Hunters, and more. Trust me when I say there is nothing else like Flip City on the market. So subscribe today. It will be delivered in print, or you can even get it digitally if you're one of those wacky Zoomers. Either way, follow our link and sign up today, and if you put in midnight, you get an extra 10% off. Check out Flip City Magazine today. Don't adjust your sets. No, I didn't play the wrong intro. 4K for You is back, and actually, this is a very special episode. Ladies and gentlemen, we have that damn fool, Idealistic Crusader himself, aka Spencer here. How are you doing? This is something I've been trying to get done for a long time.
Oh, I'm doing fine. It's nice to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. And yeah, you kind of went viral a little bit not too long ago. We're going to talk about that. But
Yeah.
before we do, let's intro you to the many people out there who may not even be aware of you. You do have a channel called A Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader, and you do film reviews, book reviews, all sorts of reviews. But you have to be one of the most thorough reviewers I've ever met. And I love it. And I'm hoping my audience finds you if they haven't already, because I think that you'll be able to answer any and all questions they may have about physical media through your videos. But welcome, Spencer.
Nice to be here. I certainly do my darndest. If it's something I don't know about, I'm gonna go research it. Like I'm gonna I have to figure stuff out sometimes. Basically, I just started doing reviews because I couldn't find reviews that covered all the nerdy stuff that I was trying to figure out or looking for. So then I was like, well, if nobody else is doing it, I've got this film degree that hasn't gotten me anywhere, and I have all of this knowledge I carry around and this stuff I wonder about. I wake up in the middle of the night going, I wonder if somebody found that element, then that could get scanned and then that could be turned into a new restoration. Or wouldn't it be great if we could fix this audio track? And that's like me waking up at 3:00 in the morning, just suddenly thinking that. So yeah, I tried to put this to good use.
So your background is you do have a little background in film, then it sounds like.
Oh yeah, this is a lifelong thing for me. I've done this since I was a little kid. Just I've been obsessed, and it just kept going and snowballing. And then over time, a couple different scripts came out that had various things that were, shall we say, not correct. And one after another in a short span of time. And I'd always been fascinated with home video, and as a 90s kid, the idea that you could actually purchase a movie and own it as many times as you want was just this is amazing. But and especially growing up before there was major internet access, you just couldn't know things. You had to try and figure it out on your own. But a couple releases in the DVD era really pushed me over into, hey, I don't think these studios and people in charge necessarily know what they're doing all the time. And then that's really what did it. And I was like, this is not good. Like people don't look into this enough. And then it just kept snowballing. And then one day I decided, nobody really does it to this level in online reviews. Maybe I should make YouTube videos instead of nerdy blog posts that nobody reads.
Yeah, and you do have a ton of videos that I've watched myself and sent to friends because you do thoroughly go through them, and you came onto my radar during the whole Superman debacle, the Fleischer series that Warner put out. And I'm assuming you had
Yeah.
come on a lot of people's radar at that time because Bill Hunt was the first one who keyed me in on it because I was super excited that we were finally getting these in HD. And I was telling all my friends about it, and then all of a sudden, Bill just crushed me. He's like, "Yeah, these things look like crap. They're compressed to hell onto, a BD50, I think it was, for some no good reason, and
With a
so on
bunch
and
of
so forth."
wasted space. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh.
go ahead and your thoughts on that thing, because that was kind of where
Whew.
you came on my radar as far as like,
Yeah, and that what you see in the videos that I did, that was my polite version. Uh, that was me trying to, keep a polite front and be like, "Hey, this is really not good, guys." But I had been waiting for the Fleischer Superman since they were put on the Superman box set as extras on DVD in 2006, because that was the first time we saw that Warner Master, and it had all the audio errors because they standardized the credits and stuff. And I grew up with the multitudes of crappy public domain copies, and it was so exciting to see a new master, even though they were just, shoved on as extras. And then I started noticing all those errors, and I'm like, oh, come on, guys. And then they never really addressed it. And then that was my number one. Every time the Warner Archive had their anybody have requests, like every time, that was what I did, because I'm like, these are so important. Like if they got a new master and at least a Blu-ray, and especially a Warner Archive release, that would get more people interested in animation history and the Fleischers, and it would be good all around. But yeah, unfortunately, the Warner Studio label stepped in, and those were 4K scans of original elements, and it's just ungodly. I mean, the color timing, the DNR. I mean, the fact that even, yeah, you have to use DNR in most everything to a certain degree in just general work. That's a given, but to apply anything beyond that to the Fleischer Supermans, I mean, that's like, I think it's the greatest animation ever done, but it's up there for everybody, all animation historians. But and then they didn't just leave the audio problems as is; they introduced new ones. And the compression is so bad that when, especially upscaled to 4K, everything's a motion blob of compression noise, and it's, oh god. And there's new visual errors in the color timing, and so I got so mad that I made my all the errors in the Blu-ray video because I found 66 of them. So I have issues with a lot of Warner releases, and it's all due to the Warner Studio label doing stuff that's just stupid, whether it's bad compression or scrubbing audio tracks in terms of noise reduction, being too heavy-handed, or not putting original audio on, or the HDR being way too bright for a catalog title. It's just with them, it's just that it's like they're such a big corporation that they're not paying attention in areas where they should. There's not the quality care, whereas the tiny archive division, they do try with every release. They can't make extras because they don't have the budget for that, but they're consistently doing catalog titles, all from new scans at MPI and one by one. So it's that quality over quantity model. And it's like, you guys should have just let the archive division run the home video department 10 years ago. that still needs to happen. If that happened, there wouldn't be any problems, and it wouldn't cost any difference in money. Like it literally would not. It just takes the right people in the right places who at least know somewhat what they're doing. But
Yeah.
Warner is by no means the worst in terms of archival issues, is what I would call it, of archival presentation issues. But this is one of the worst home video releases of all time, and it's a desecration of the Fleischer Superman cartoons. And I say that because it's just plain incompetent, and it does affect the presentation. The color timing is screwed up, the fine detail is scrubbed away, the compression is hideous. There's like, I can't remember the exact number, but there's a giant chunk of this BD50 that's not even used because they compressed the shorts down. It's like their streaming file sizes and they just slapped them on a disc.
Which is
But
probably what
also,
they did.
yeah, but if you've seen any of my other videos,
Yeah.
I've got several
Yeah.
more I've got to do. But Warner's studio division and their animated releases on Blu-ray, their track record's pretty crappy.
It depends, like you said, because like I've got some from the archive, from the Popeye discs, for instance. There's 2K discs. I swear they've done 4K scans of those because they look amazing. And
That's
the
how
color
the
just
Fleischer
pops and,
Supermans
yeah,
were going to
should
look.
look.
It's the same scan process, and Warner Archive was going to do them, but during the whole COVID shuffle and George Feltenstein was out for a while and then they brought him back, that was when the studio division apparently came in and said, "Oh, this is Superman. We're going to do this." And they didn't have any of the archive division's notes, and the archive knew they were going to have to do stuff like fix the audio problems and make sure the transfer was right. So it's just like the Hanna-Barbera restorations, because they've been doing the whole library. And if you look at it, when the archive does one, it's because it
They
could be
look
whether it's
great.
the Jetsons or the Johnny Quest Blu-ray is one of the greatest Blu-rays of all time. But then you look at those same scans done at the same time, handled by the studio division, and the Scooby-Doo Blu-ray is one of the worst Blu-rays ever made. And it's shoved onto BD25s, and it's got DNR, and it's overcompressed, and one audio. There's some audio quirks, and it's like. And then, of course, don't even get me started on Batman the Animated Series, because that's.
Which I get in arguments to this day with people about, because they're like, "Oh no, it seems fine to me," or whatever. But yeah, you went through and you found, and I don't know if there was two different versions that were released too, because one person said they went to each and every issue you claimed, and it's not on their discs. So I'm like, well, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Warner quietly fixed them on disc and didn't tell anybody, because that's their MO.
Well, I have
Because they've
the
done that with
reissue
Mad Max
version.
and Rocky, and you said that too. Like, yeah, there's the reissue version, which
Yeah, it's the
yeah,
same disc. And they never fixed the audio errors on the defective episodes that they did for streaming. Just like
yeah,
on
that's
some of the
one thing you did
Scooby-Doo
say.
releases
Yeah,
that had off-sync audio, they fixed that on streaming, and they didn't say anything. So they'll do that. But if you start digging more into B-Test, there's all these little quirks. And then I found the stuff where there's like, it's like multiple versions of the opening the opening title sequence. Like the audio has multiple different mixes and versions, and some of them sound janky for no reason. And then of course you have the DNR and the overcompression and the different color timing that's kind of iffy in places, and the defective audio on some episodes, and they shove too many episodes onto too few discs. And it's like, why? None of this was necessary. It's little things start to add up, and then they do stuff because it's also been common practice for so long, whether it's remixing everything into at least 5.1 or beyond. And now we've got Atmos and HDR. So there's additional issues that can happen that then multiply on top of stuff that goes back to the DVD explosion. But with catalog titles, HDR can be a giant problem because it's so incredibly difficult to do that right, because you have to sit there and you've got more dynamic range, sure, but you have to make sure you don't alter the look of a film, say shot in the 1940s. You have to make sure it's properly handled, so it's not altering anything, or you don't suddenly have a lamp in the shot that looks like what's been the Sony light cannon effect, because when Sony started, they were really bad at that, and so all their early transfers especially are known as the Sony light cannon transfers, where it's like, I need sunglasses. This is crazy. But like with Warner, the one that killed me was the Maltese Falcon, because that is an intricately designed visual experience, shot by the great Arthur Edison. And there's a lot in there that's similar to what was done in Citizen Kane, because they were shot at the same time. And without realizing it, they were kind of working in similar areas. And when you look at that UHD, yes, it's a beautiful new scan, but there's moments throughout that where it's just like, especially if you know the film and you know 1940s photography and you know what Arthur Edison would even do the next year on Casablanca, you'll know that it's just, certain areas of the frame are now almost detaching themselves because they're too bright, and it's messing with the actual the actual structure of the composition. And then of course the compression on that disc wasn't super great, and it's HDR10 only because Warner doesn't do Dolby Vision, and they scrubbed the audio track of detail. And the scary thing was I went through all my different versions, and then I bought more obscure old versions, and my old DVD that I had when I was a kid is actually the best sounding version of the Maltese Falcon, the old 2000 snapper case DVD. And they just used that and scrubbed it now like two or three different times.
And that seems to be like the thing that bothers me most is back when DVD was at its height, because I actually knew people who worked in Warner, and they were one of the best as far as home video, and they did pay attention to all that stuff. And at DVD time, I don't know if there was anybody maybe other than Sony who could compete with them on quality. Definitely couldn't compete with them on special features. Like, they would go all out and make sure that you got some of the coolest releases. Even if they've done it 2-3 times before, they were going to make sure this version was that it made it worth buying, not only for the picture quality and the sound quality, but they made sure they went out of their way for the extras and such. But I mean, like you said, I mean, I remember when King Kong and Citizen Kane and stuff first came out on disc from Warner Brothers, they were just amazing sets. And sure, sometimes you'd have your quirks and your problems, and there's certain things you can't get around.
Don't get me started on the Kane DVD.
But like, yeah, like what is the deal with like where back in the DVD days, it felt like they actually meticulously went through shot by shot, even when they probably didn't have to, considering the amount of quality we saw on a DVD, compared to now where like they'll run like some kind of denoise and throw it on a disc, and it's like they're not even paying attention to how many scenes are
there's
destroyed.
No quality control.
Exactly. And I've even
none.
Begged and pleaded with these guys. I'm like, if any of you are listening, you have a whole group of people online here who are more than willing to help you with your quality control, and somebody like you should be the last line of defense.
Oh, right? I've begged. I will do it for free. I don't care.
That's what I mean.
To the best of my ability, because the scary part is when I watch something now, especially because I do reviews now, I have my notes app open and I take timestamp notes like crazy. I'm literally doing QC. It's scary. And then also that's how I reference to go back to know, oh, well, there was a frame tear here, and it gets ridiculous, and it does distract from the experience. And it's not that I'm trying to nitpick or be somebody who watches every single frame, but it just over time it starts to get worse and worse. And now you see stuff where like for example, MGM is cranking out all these 4K masters and things. And at first when they started, it was, they were cranking out, it was 4K masters in SDR, but they were actually pretty well done, with some issues here and there. And now that they've had a sort of second sort of era of doing 4K masters, most of the stuff is what they're giving to Kino. If you look at those, they're filled with print defects, damage throughout. The HDR can be all over the place, the audio can be screwy. There's where they started kind of sort of okay, now they're just
well,
yeah, it's
that might have been because I think before Amazon bought them, I think they were working with Sony more closely, if it was one of those companies. They used to do with Fox. Then when Fox got bought by Disney, I can't remember who they went through. But like that was something I found out about MGM and busted them on a while back. I don't know if you ever saw that episode, but I found out when Overboard was remastered that MGM had been basically selling a bunch of their upconverted DVD masters as Blu-rays. So, like, you
Oh
could
yeah.
buy a bunch of their movies and you would find out, and I found out that, yeah, most of them were just 480p upscales. And you
Or
could
it
definitely
was
tell when you would
or
check
it
them
was an
against a newer
old
scan.
master that had been
Yeah.
done, like, because Sony started doing HD masters way early in DVD. So
Yep.
then they had the ability to release or license those out as a Blu-ray. Sometimes
Mhm,
they can look crummy, sometimes they can look pretty solid, sometimes they can look really good. But
mhm.
Sony's somebody to usually be like, well, we could do that, but really wouldn't be up to par. Same thing that the Warner Archives archive guys would do and say, well, we could throw that out, but we don't feel that's appropriate. Fans wouldn't, so we're going to do a new scan of the best we've got. But other studios, they don't, and licensors and things, they don't really care. There's some that will throw out anything that's just sitting on a shelf. But I know there were a lot of old MGM masters that lasted a long while because some of those even go back into the Laserdisc era and MGM. But with MGM, you've got the never-ending financial saga that started all the way
Yeah, that's
back,
the
and
thing.
the Kerkorian madness in the 70s and the destruction of the studio, and then swallowing up UA, and now we're tied to Amazon. And of course, my great fear is, so are we ever going to get the original James Bond films and those 4K masters that are SDR? They're not even HDR, that were
Well,
done
and are
back in
they even
like
from the
2012.
negatives? That was my question too.
Well, that's see, we don't
'Cause
know
that's a lot of the
anything.
MGM 20th Century Fox earlier ones, and I
And
noticed it
we
was a
don't
problem with
know
the
the
Fox
full
ones
era.
now.
We don't know, and Lowry claimed they did negative scans back for the hideous masters we're still cursed with that they first did for those god awful Ultimate Edition DVDs. And if you ever wondered what was the release that firmly pushed me into all of this, these. Um,
Yeah, I'm not
but
as big of a Bond fan, but I respect the fandom for sure.
they only did some negative scans then. They didn't do
Yeah.
all of them. So most of them were video masters. And then a few of the Blu-rays are newer scans that aren't Lowry. So it's the Blu-rays are a hot mess of different eras of transfers, and some reverted to an older one like GoldenEye, which is why it looks so crappy. And some went to a newer one, and some have the boosted contrast problem. So that's a mess. But the 4K masters that have been sitting on a shelf, when you look at them on streaming, you can tell they are better than the Blu-rays in terms of color timing and visual details. So they are a jump ahead. But as far as I can tell, they first started turning up as DCP screenings in 2012, 2014. And when you see them on streaming and stuff, they're all SDR. So my thing is, I think that they were done during that sort of first era of MGM getting into 4K transfers, whether they did it or somebody else did, and they were done as SDR. So that means these are already old
Mhm.
masters. So even if they release them, they're going to have to do it as is. But I'm sure they would try to then apply HDR after the fact, which usually does not turn out well. And they're not going to redo them from scratch, which they really need to since they've taken so long. And we have to worry that we're even going to get them because we don't know how the Amazon deal and how Eon, and they're it's just there's no telling how they're all the entities are going to act. And Eon tries to act like the original films don't exist, it seems. So it's like, and then of
Yeah.
course the audio is foobar on most of them. So
Yeah, because in my
that's
opinion, I've
unfortunate.
noticed a bit of hit and miss with, the MGM titles as of late. Because 'cause you're not wrong there. Some seem a little bit better than others. Maybe it just depends on who got their hands on them.
Yeah.
But that's something where, I mean, look, I've heard a lot of people complain about what you and I do, and you may be even somebody who people may may actually accuse of being overly pedantic when it comes to some of this stuff. Sure, that's something you may have heard before. Then
You
again,
don't say.
yeah. But then again, like, I try to tell these people, it's like, look, chances are this is the last time these negatives are ever gonna be scanned or touched
Mhm.
again,
Yep.
and I think great pains should be made to make them look and feel as they were intended to be. And I'm one who actually enjoys, multiple channel remixes of sound and stuff, especially if you can get your hands on the original sound mix. And I'm somebody who's really intrigued by the new technology they have to separate audio channels, where, in AI and certain other things they can use, we've gone worlds ahead in audio to where I think it's becoming detrimental to video. Because, I mean, let's kind of segue into probably one of the most controversial things in home video history, because I'll tell you what, Spencer, like the one question that I've gotten asked more than anything when I started the show, probably you got asked more than anything before they came out, and I know Bill Hunt and others got asked endlessly for years, was when are we getting James Cameron's films in 4K?
Yep.
And it blew up the internet because there's so many people who I think just don't get the argument or don't understand why some of us are upset. They're like, you finally have these. Why are you so upset? It's like, look, the effort was not put into these things. Okay. They literally took scans that in some cases are older than most of your children, and they've literally ran them through an AI, which wasn't James one of the people who was warning us about AI to begin with? That's what really boggles my mind, is how can you trust your
You'd
babies
think so.
to the thing that you warned us about? So
That you
yeah,
made
I
a
mean,
lot of money from.
I mean, you've done a video about it, and this has been a topic now for a while, and it's still ongoing. I mean, there's the memes, there's the discussion, the argument, but I think
It's
this
the
is something that is
precedent that's the
important.
worst
Yeah.
in terms, and what got me hot and bothered was no film should be treated like that. You can't sit there and try to eradicate the actual physical method of how the film was produced in the first place. That's like going in and almost trying to strip out the actual fact that it was shot on photochemical film stock and cut by hand and finished by hand. You're trying to erase the era of production and the actual methodology. And it doesn't work that way. And even if you wanted to do all that and blah 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 blah, you should at least present it as an alternative option. And also it shows that you apparently have some, you don't have faith in in the work that you're doing, because you don't want to put it side by side with how it originally was. And in those cases, none of those were brand new workflows. None of them. And that for titles like that, that were obviously not going to lose money, that were some of the most requested titles of all time, that were put in a sort of self-imposed moratorium for no reason. If anything couldn't, if those couldn't get a brand new 4K scanning workflow and just do it from scratch, which would have taken less money and less time than all the junk that they did when they finally got around to it, uh, you know, that boggles the mind. But for me, the biggest thing is the precedent that sets, because that now there's a precedent, and people are going to go, oh, well, James Cameron did that and those sold a lot, and that's what people must like now. And oh, we can use all this new AI stuff and it's great. And but it's like, no, that just this is not good. Um, and I know not everybody has a film background, and not everybody you know goes to repertory theaters and geeks out over every print they can see, regardless of how battered it might be, or knows about different processes, or reads way too many articles about obscure film formats and sound processes, um, and so you're going to have a good chunk of the audience who buys something and they're just happy to have it, and it looks great to them, which is understandable. You shouldn't have to have a whole, you know. Body of reference materials in your head to go back to, but there should at least be some level of what I always refer to as not just archival quality, but at least some sort of archival mindset, because physical media and video masters have become the way that we actually preserve and view the film medium. And so, ironically, the early days of home video, when they couldn't do much and the quality could vary wildly depending on the print source they had, or an interpositive, or whatever it was they were doing, that stuff was as is within the format limitations of the time, technically. So ironically, when I go back to a laser disc, or I pick up a VHS tape because I'm like, well, I need to check the audio track of this. With anything, you never know what it's going to be like when you put it in for the first time. You don't know what print they had. You don't know what they transferred. sometimes it can be hilariously terrible, or the color is jacked. So you've got the skin tones, or what you call the guys look like lobstermen because their faces are so red, or it's
Or
just
overly yellow or whatever.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
all kinds of nasty. But then sometimes they would do an amazing job, and it's like, how did they do this in 1987? It's like, how did Criterion get this amazing transfer on this Laserdisc, or how did Warner do this, or what did MGM scan? Because this looks incredible, especially for them. Um, so yeah, ironically, a lot of those are actually more archival in a way, because they couldn't do the stuff that they can do now. It started more in the mid 90s when digital tools became available, and you started seeing some laser discs that would have stereo remixes or edge enhancement applied more, or the first iterations of DNR, like the dreaded Star Wars Definitive Collection masters with the motion smearing and all that
Ugh.
stuff. Yeah, so it's not like these are new problems, but I just find it fascinating and very sad in a way that the more you dig into this stuff, that ironically, the early stuff that people think is unimportant, or oh, why would you bother with an old video format or something? Not saying that it's fully accurate or a perfect reference or something, but
No, but it is
if
a starting point.
yes, and if you get into this more and you get some good gear, because with analog video, the playback quality of players varies wildly in terms of the video output, and then you have to calibrate your monitor and have a good scaler or have a CRT. You gotta work at it, but I think it's also a good frame of reference. And then in the realm of audio,
Well, before we
everything's
get to audio,
yeah.
because I just want to say, because on the picture part, because this is something that drives my boss Andre and I crazy, is like, we swear there's got to be at least one or two of the facilities where they do these, where their calibration on their monitors has to be completely off,
Oh yeah.
completely off. Because I'm sitting here watching some of these movies and I'm going, and how the hell do you let that go through? And then the one that boggled my mind was Out of Sight, the Steven Soderbergh film.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you know if I'm aware of what I'm going with this, but in the original film, if you watch it on the Blu-ray and previous editions, there is a bit of an orange wash on the Florida scenes and a blue wash on the Michigan scenes. But you can still see like the grass and the green in the grass in the background and the gray in the buildings and certain things. On the new 4K, everything is orange and everything is blue. So whoever did it just cranked up the orange and the blue in those, and somehow supposedly it was signed off on by the DP or the director himself. And I'm like, how? Because did you not notice how bad that looks? It literally looks like you just put some filter over it and didn't even try to mess with it to look like the original film. And then I've heard some people like they don't know exactly what they did, or these kids don't have the notes or anything to go by. It's like you have tons of reference material.
Yeah.
Okay. And it may not be 100% accurate as far as like the amount of colors and stuff, but you could look at it, eyeball it a little bit and go, yeah, something ain't right there. We need to go a little bit more in the gold here. We need to get a little bit more into this or whatever. How hard is it to do that? Where that's exactly what you were doing, right? Like you were literally going through each and every one, going, okay. And if you actually saw it in theater, I'm sure you're actually also trying to, go back and go, okay, how did it look when I saw it in the theater? Because that's the thing is, and some kids nowadays, I don't think understand is how different, it was to go see a movie on 35 millimeter film compared to the digital stuff now. And frankly, even some of the revival stuff I've seen, I won't go to a lot of these revival screenings, and people ask why, and I say, because it's going to look like crap. I have a better chance of watching it on my 82-inch TV to look better.
Oh, don't even get me started. Oh, like, especially
Yeah,
when it's a DCP of the exact same thing, and especially when most of the time it's a flawed master, or it's got the bad audio remix, or it's got an error that I know about. I'm like, no, and the quality is going to be not at the level of what you can get at home, because for most screens in the country, quality presentation went in the toilet ages ago. My big example of that was the recent reissue of Phantom Menace, which made a lot of money and made people sit up and take notice, because there's now the new generation who grew up with the prequels and stuff. But in the 25 years since Phantom Menace came out in 99, yes, people crap on the movie, but on the presentation side, that was just about the pinnacle of 35 millimeter presentation. That Dolby EX mix is one of the greatest mixes of all time that they've now remixed and tamed down multiple times. But you could not pay me to go see the 25th anniversary version that just came out, because that's the 4K iteration, which is the more DNR'd, more processed version of the Blu-ray version, which was the super processed DNR'd version of the ancient digital intermediate that they've refused to go in and update because they have to do a complete, TNG style rebuild. And it's like, well, it's you're not going to lose money. It needs to be done. Plus, they're still doing the extended version, so it's not even the better theatrical cut. And the only way you can properly watch and hear the Phantom Menace is the old Japanese import Laserdisc, which has a lot of really crummy video processing on it. So the image is kind of yucky looking, but the audio is still, a demo piece to this day. And that's the only way you could see the theatrical cut in widescreen with the 5.1 EX, at all in terms of any sort of official release.
Yeah, and that kind of gets us back to the whole James Cameron thing. Is like this, it's not like these movies are, some unknown or little known film, or like, hey, here's a great example. Talking about Amazon and stuff like that. Killer Clowns just come out not too long ago. Killer Clowns has a better 4K scan than The Abyss, True Lies, and Aliens. We live in that world.
Vinegar Syndrome does better work with films that were shot on 16 millimeter. I mean,
Exactly.
the most obscure schlock that sometimes you've never even heard of. That is,
or even Arrow does too. Yeah.
Oh gosh, Arrow has done such incredible work. It's just.
Did you get Basket Case yet, or even a fan of it, or?
It's on my radar. It
looks pretty good for 16 millimeter 4K. I was like impressed.
Yeah, you can tell the difference when people actually put the work in. Yeah, it may cost a little money, but it takes a little money to do anything. It just takes time and effort, and it's not even having to have a new scan every time. If like on the boutique label side of things, they're putting in usually more than a studio label will have the time or budget to set aside for. But even among those, you can tell the difference in effort. I not to single anybody out, but I think Indicator is unmatched in their efforts, because even if they get an old Sony HD master, they go the extra mile on everything. They max out the bit rate. They make a beautiful piece of artwork for the cover. They produce an extensive book for all the limited editions, and the supplements they produce are not just about the film, but about the history of the cast and the crew and the world of and each one is like a reference book experience. And then their box sets are just out of this world. But, it's not like they have a ton of money or a lot of resources and stuff. What Arrow did on the Bruce Lee box set, that was all them. I mean, and then you get to Final Game of Death, which for me is a revolution in film documentaries. It's a new type of way
I wasn't
of
expecting
understanding
that.
production. And that was just them. And I saw that. I watched it all in one go. I was just like, I can't believe this. And for me, that's the greatest film documentary that has been made since Charles de Lazarica's Dangerous Days, his Blade Runner epic documentary. Like, Final Game of Death is the first time somebody has raised the bar, and that, I think it should have won a special Academy Award. It's that level of, it needs to be in every film school in the world, because that is just a complete crash course. And this is what it takes. This is how a film is built. And they never even got to finish this film. And it's simply done. So even people who don't even know the first thing about film production understand totally, and they can get everything. So, and again, that was just the guys at Arrow in wherever their office is, or if they have a cubicle or their little workstation, and all they had was the 3 to 4 hours of raw takes with no audio, and it's like,
well, and I've talked to some of the
unbelievable.
guys before that work in the industry, and I can't say specifically who, because we're may or may not be working with something in the background with somebody. But anyway, point being, yeah, these things are especially for the boutique companies, they are a massive undertaking. The smaller the company, the harder it is because they're
Yeah.
generally at the mercy of the studio. But I mean, even when you got somebody like Kino, who's one of the bigger ones, I'll give them credit for even lately trying to go out of their way to re-release some of their older stuff that they feel were on compromised, quality, whether it's compressed a little
That
too much or
that
whatever.
cracked me up because they ignored that stuff for years, and
Yeah,
yeah, while I'm happy they're, finally doing something about it, it also kind of felt like a cash grab double dip, and now you have to buy it again because they're making it the way it should have been made the first time, but also
fair.
they've now literally changed encoding houses, and their encoding is going in the toilet. So, and
Mm.
with Kino, they license so much that they don't really have any quality control, and so you never know what exactly might turn up.
That is
And
one of their
I have
problems.
many frustrations with them, and some of their
I
representatives are, shall we say, rather not friendly at times.
I've had mostly good interactions with them, but the thing is you're right. Like, there's probably they need to slow down on the quantity and maybe start paying more attention to the quality. That's for sure. Because for a while there, they
Well,
were quickly becoming my favorite just because they made sure everything was out and they did the best they could. And then all of a sudden, there's a few titles where I was just like, what is going on here? And I know sometimes they're at the mercy of the studios. And I wonder if that's where the indications are, where they actually put who's responsible for the scan on the back. But I
well,
haven't seen
I
you
don't
talk too
fault.
much about Kino, so
Oh, I have a lot of Kino stuff.
that I've
Uh,
done, that I've seen you watch. I At least that I've watched, so I haven't seen you speak too
yeah,
much on that.
I don't ever fault anybody when it's obviously something that's baked into what they were given, because you're limited to that, and but it's the other side of things where it's like, okay, well, you can at least make sure your disc is encoded properly or doesn't have a color space issue or have defective audio or screwy things like that, or frame rate issues, or a lot of, and all of those and more things I've run into on random Kino releases, and there are good Kino releases too. So but it's so scattershot that it gets really frustrating. And then when you run into stuff that's legitimately bad, or a problem that's not tied to issues with what they were given, like the because I'm the Leone geek who did super long videos on the ups and downs of the UHDs. I would highlight, this is tied into the master they got. This is an MGM problem. This is a
Right.
long-standing MGM audio problem. Stuff like that. I always point that out, but it's the other side of things, and
Well,
their attitude is usually like, yeah, you just should be grateful, or that
well,
we don't think it's a
that's
problem. And then
I
there's one that I just saw a brand new release of theirs, and I know you've seen some of the discussion on the Once Upon a Time in the West UHD and how Paramount used a BD66,
we're
so
gonna get to
compression
that.
is a big
Yeah.
issue. Well, let me just say, as bad as the compression is on this, it is not the worst compression issue of the year, because there's a Kino disc that I just saw that uses a BD100 for a short film that's Academy ratio black and white, and it's possibly the worst compression I've seen on a UHD.
Weird. Which one is that?
It's the UHD of Fear and Desire, and it's on the restoration of the longer cut with all that lost, the almost 10 minutes of lost footage that was put back.
Weird.
It's macro blocking City all the way through. It's unbelievable.
I haven't
I'm
even
just,
watched it yet.
yeah, just wait till you put it in. It's opening shot right there, all the way through. And I'm just like, why? And of course, it's not like that film is of the greatest technical quality to begin with, due to the nature of the production and the fact that Kubrick tried to suppress it all those years. And the regular version looks okay. It's at least encoded better, but it's like, why?
Yeah, that one I haven't got a chance to check out yet because I do have it. But the reason I brought him up is because at least where I was going with it anyway
No, sorry
is at
sorry to
least no,
sidetrack.
no, no. You're fine. You're fine. Uh, they actually at least acknowledge sometimes when there's things that need to be fixed. I'll give them that much. And the interactions I've had with him have been pretty good. Um, the reason I bring it up though, and this is a funny one because most people know I have a bit of a vendetta. Shout is the worst though. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. When they never fix their issues and
the
I don't know if recently
encoding.
you've
Oh,
seen some of
geez.
just their personal problems they have with people. I'm one of the famous people that's blocked
Oh,
from
yeah, I
buying stuff
remember I heard you talking
from
about
their
that on the
site,
stream,
and
yeah.
I just found out these other guys called oh god, their name just escapes me. The the Death Pit podcast or something like that. I think they are. They're another home video podcaster, and they've gotten legal threats now from Shout, and they've had a history of problems with Shout. So, like, yeah,
That
this is a company that
that's
used to
weird.
be one of the best in the business as far as boutique titles. It's like, boy, how the mighty have fallen. I say, like, because there's so many issues they don't even want to address. They've
I've always had issues with them because for me, on the
ah,
technical side of things, they were always using older masters, their encoding jobs were always crappy, they had tons of
talk
issues, never
about
got
double
fixed.
dipping. Yeah, I was
That
gonna say because
that
you brought
Pink
up
Panther
but yeah,
set, which is riddled with so many transfer and audio problems, that's now out of print. And the other thing, all their stuff is super pricey. Like it's got a built-in markup too. So it's like when they have a sale,
hmm
it's like that's the price it should have been in the first place, especially for a 20-year-old master with no extras and crummy encoding and but a lot of this stuff, there's not much you can do other than just sort of sigh
hmm
and then try to fix it yourself if you can.
yeah. Dr. Coffin Nails somehow for some reason Shout Factory claims they own the copyright on the design of Creepshow.
Did they, like, purchase it from somebody or I
'Cause they had,
I don't
their
know.
own design, Dead Pit did, of a in the style of Creepshow with the guys on the shirt and the one looking in the window and the one looking at the comic book. It was, completely original design based on the Creepshow design, and they got a legal cease and desist letter from
Mhm.
Shout Factory about it. I'm never gonna call them Shout Studios, they can kiss my ding dong on that. They can get all pretentious as much as they
Or
want, yeah.
Scream or whatever. I just call
Yeah,
them Shout.
they're Shout.
Yeah.
And like you're right. All the things you just said are 100% correct. And to me, that is the biggest problem. And they're probably the worst offender when it comes to the collector's market and the boutique market because they are doing everything wrong. And it's almost like they're doing it on purpose. And as far as antagonistic goes, like they are the worst. And it sounds like the biggest problem is because some of the better people have left the company now and things of that sort. But like they are one of the ones that I think are the worst as far as hit and miss and overcharging. And I
Yeah.
mean, there's even errors in certain discs they won't acknowledge and stuff at certain times. It's like you're never going to, are you?
Mhm.
And no, they weren't. They won't.
That's
They're
why
not
most
going.
of
They're
the
going to make
Hammer
you wait
discs
to
are
rebuy it.
screwy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say the reason I was getting to that is because I'd say Shout is the worst in my opinion, but I didn't know if you had shared that opinion or not. But
I've had so many issues with various shout discs, and it's not that I want to dump on a particular label or say some are better or worse than others, but just from my own personal experience and in terms of the U.S. boutique labels that are the major ones, it's just like it's just like this is not good, guys.
yeah, well, some of the better ones we did mention were like Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow. And on that note, Donut Lord wants to know how the Conan set is. Well, we did review it slightly, but as you can see, it's up over your
Yeah,
shoulder
I
there.
I kind of did. I always try to put up a display. I worry about the goofy stuff too much. But if people can't tell, this is sort of my good and bad sides of modern transfers and where care is put in and where incompetence exists and a lot of bad things are done. So yeah, if
Because
you can't
famously, the
tell.
Conan transfer was horrible on the
Oh, the
Universal
Conan
disc. The
Blu-ray was so
color,
awful. I refuse to even have anything to do with it. The DVD was better than the
my
Blu-rays for
boss
both
will agree with
films,
you. Yeah,
and they didn't have original audio on the Blu-rays, and plus Barbarian had the longer version on the DVD, and they had better color timing. So I was just watching my DVD on my HD CRT where they looked fantastic. So if I watched Conan, I would just do it that way, and people might think I was crazy until they actually watched it that way, and then they'd be like, "Oh, I see what you mean." I'm like, "Yeah." Um, so it was a shock when Arrow announced it, and I would have already had my review done, but I've been dealing with my annoying as hell Panasonic UHD UB820 tray dying repeatedly,
I
just out
saw
of
that.
warranty. And I'm not the only one, and it happens
Weird.
on even the flagship model. So it's a known problem that's becoming more and more prevalent. That's why I
Hmm.
did a video, because I'm like, every time this happens, I have to tear apart my whole player and hope I don't break it, just to turn a little cog inside the disc tray that I also have to disassemble. Um, and thank goodness for some of the Reddit communities, because people who actually, did tech repairs were the ones who kind of figured it out and were able to give, you know, people without that experience some pointers. So I saw that and I'm like, well, I don't know. And then one day I'm like, well, it happened 1 month out of warranty, so I've got nothing to lose. And sure enough, that worked. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And then it can
Mhm.
go again in any minute. So I've done it like 6 times now. It's
Yeah.
nuts. So that's what's delayed my review. But yeah, Arrow did their same incredible, we go the extra mile, and they generated all these new extras, and they did new scans, and they did all the work themselves. That's the key difference. Usually the only thing that can go wrong or iffy in that instance is they're usually still having to get audio supplied from the studio, and a lot of times the studio will just send over whatever they have, and that could be a great
Yeah.
source, or it could be the noise reduced track that was on the DVD, or something. So unfortunately, audio is the thing that doesn't get the same level of scrutiny applied. But that, outside of that potentially being a quirk or an issue, the efforts that Arrow's been going into on especially the UHD catalog titles they've been doing, it's just like, okay, now they're leading the charge in terms of 4K on catalog for catalog titles, and producing editions of quality with new supplements and things. And it's still not like they have all the money in the world, and all these resources and stuff. We're never going to see the DVD era again, where you had whole teams and loads of quality control. But at least people cared then. So,
Well, and I think
and
Arrow might be one of the only ones who has any kind of quality control because uh, I actually was surprisingly that's one of my few times I got a scoop was the one who broke the news that we were going to get Conan, and it was almost a year and a half or so before it finally came out. But that's because the way these titles work, and I know some things that are coming down the pipe I can't say nothing about because they do take years sometimes. And when
yeah.
I say years, I mean years
Hmm.
to put together everything. Because you're right, they are at the mercy of the studios. And if they want to do them right, it does take the time. Sometimes they have to convince the studio that it's worth doing another scan or some kind of new process to it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's up to them to be able to, come up with the funding to do that, or they get lucky and the studio will do it for them. But then, like we were talking earlier, they're kind of at their mercy. But yeah, Conan was a great example of what can be done and done right. And that's why I also like Vinegar Syndrome, because I like them because they'll even go to the, well, not go to the extra extent or the leave it alone, let's say. Like a great example of that, at least I don't know if you've caught it or even a fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Vinegar Syndrome 4K looks amazing. And they didn't even bother fixing some of the stuff. And I'm like, I'm glad because it kind of adds a little of the grindhouse to it. So it's like, leave
Yeah,
some
it's
of that
it's
alone. It doesn't
inherent
need to be
to
fixed,
to
you
that
know? Yeah.
that experience
Yeah.
for certain titles, for sure. But when it's stuff that was not intended, and it was not a lower budget film where that kind of happened inherently, or it's not supposed to have that sort of aesthetic, when you've got bad frame tears, or specs, or audio with hum problems, or flopped channels,
Right. I'm
they're
obviously not talking about any major issue. I'm just talking about like Vinegar Syndrome isn't going to go as far as, or they're not cranking up their scratch fixer on their whatever
yeah.
AI they got to where not every little speck is getting destroyed.
But they're also not going to let something pass through with 9,000 hairs in it, you
Exactly,
know.
exactly, exactly. So like I love that quality control and I feel like Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow have probably gotten there. But on the other hand, we've got the studios, which is such a crapshoot. And Paramount is one where I got to give them credit. They're going out of their way to try and get more and more titles out in 4K. I think the problems we're having though is the varied masters and the stuff that's coming out, and
You
more
mentioned
famously,
you mentioned the P word.
I know,
They
right?
are my mortal enemy in terms of archivaldom, especially because they
I
claim
know.
that they're doing such good. I mean, everything they touch since they started their actually working with their catalog has been just screwy or cursed in some way, and that's because it seems like the people in charge have certain opinions and things that they go for in terms of excessive grain removal and hating original audio and not
Mhm.
caring about archival preservation. And first it was that unbelievably hideous To Catch a Thief Blu-ray that they said that they defended, and then things like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and
Well,
worse.
I think I might know what this is all about, what happened here, because I've been finding out more about Paramount over the last few months. Because for every, and I don't know unless I missed something in the transfer. For every good one we get, like Major League or such, I'm trying to stretch to think of another good Paramount one at the moment. We get like
Well,
5 of
there's
these.
occasional ones where
Yeah,
the tomfoolery doesn't ruin it, or
yeah.
it's like it didn't get as much, or the encoding is halfway decent, and the color's okay, and whatever
Well,
audio track it has is maybe kind of sort of okay. But then you have ones where um somehow everybody thinks it's great, and then when you're like, this is hideous, and then they think you're crazy, and you're like, but I'm not. And for me, there's this monstrosity.
that one
I
I have a
mean,
tough time with. That's a yeah.
the motion haloing alone is just, oh god.
'Cause there's some parts of it that
The
look
frozen
amazing and
grain,
some of it look
and
just
it's
so horrible.
inconsistent.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the way they use DNR is so inconsistent, and when they feel like they need to go to crazy town with it. Once Upon a Time in the West has the same issue, and how inconsistently it's applied. It's there across the board, but like part one has the most issues and the most processing thrown at it. Part two has less, but there's still something there, and then part three has the least, but it still has issues. And then the HDR handling is just constantly throwing hard shafts of bright, harsh white light everywhere. And if Gordon Willis was still around, he would have to say he would have blown a gasket. It's just, oh boy. And they didn't restore the original audio. They actually made the mono on part one sound worse than the Blu-ray, and that's the only good version of the mono that exists, is that lossy track that was on the Blu-ray. And then there's a shot in part two of this 4K master that's the worst in all three, and it looks hideously bad. Like it's like suddenly you got some section that was from a degraded alternate source that got hit with upscaling or something, because it looks so funky, and you're like, what? Um, so yeah, this was a hideous mess, and then it
Well
got perfect reviews everywhere, and I'm like, what are you smoking?
and the funny thing was because I think that was scanned at a very high resolution at the same time as Star Wars and American Graffiti and a few other things because George and Francis did them at the same time. Now, do you have the Outsiders disc?
No,
Because
not yet.
see, because that one I'm curious what you think about because I thought that one was probably one of the better ones I've ever seen because Francis actually saved everything.
Well,
So
that
when
was done
he
by
so he
Zoetrope.
rebuilt it from start. Yeah. So like everything we see on the 4K is first generation. So he redid all the opticals,
Yeah.
all the titles, everything. So I was curious if you had got the chance to see that one, but yeah.
I haven't, but that one was done all by Zoetrope in-house. Isn't
Yeah,
that right? The Zoetrope,
I
yeah. And
believe
see,
so. Yeah.
the Zoetrope guys know what they're doing. But with The Godfather, they were going back and forth with Paramount, and the Zoetrope guys did all the original cleanup and stuff, which you can glimpse in that piece they put on the set. So it's hard to tell who did what, but it seems very obvious that all the tomfoolery, because it's all the dreaded classic Paramount tomfoolery. It's like, well, since they were involved this time, it seems like that's where it came into play, and it was
Yeah, I was
fine before
wondering.
they messed with it. Because when the Zoetrope guys do stuff on their own, you know, whether it's Apocalypse Now for the final cut, or
Mhm.
Outsiders or whatever, when it's just them doing it and they finish it, and then Studio Canal or whoever puts it out, that it's already as is, you know.
Yeah, I
So
can't wait to hear what
that's
you
been
think
my
about
guess.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, Paramount and another thing they got busted on more recently is I got into it famously with somebody about Footloose. And I come to find out that that's from like a 12 or 14-year-old scan of the inner positive, not even the negative. And why in the world did Paramount? It's the 40th anniversary of that film.
Mhm.
Why are you not digging up the negative and doing a brand new scan of Footloose?
If there's a negative problem, just admit it and say, "All we
Admit it,
got is
yeah.
this inner positive." So
Yeah,
at
if that's
least
the
we
case,
went and
fine.
scanned that and did the best we could
And
with
don't
it.
charge me $30 for it. That's the
That's
other
the
thing.
other thing. The premium pricing, Once Upon a Time in the West is sold as a premium release at $40.
So let's talk a little
Uh-uh.
bit about that because that's your newest.
Mhm.
That's been the
And
bane
no,
of your
it's not
existence,
a
I think,
it's
for the last few
yes!
days.
It's not the absolute worst it could be, but it's across the board. Everything is just, we don't care. We don't respect the film. We don't respect how it needs to be actually
And
presented and how it
Scorsese
was.
was
We
involved with
don't
this too.
respect the consumer. We think you're stupid, and we're gonna make you pay full price. We shoved it onto a BD66. We don't give a crap about compression. If you notice these things, you're just some nerd or somebody on the internet who complains. The you know this of the Leone films, it's the one that doesn't have a metric crap ton of element problems and cuts and things. It's got some stuff, but the amount is very small compared to the others. But they've never fixed the end music screw up that has been on the film for 40 years now. This is the 40th year it's had the end music screwed up. That got screwed up when they did the first reconstruction in 1984, which Scorsese was also tied to. Um, and the fact that they put his name all over it and they gave him an end credit and stuff, and it's this screwed up, you're like, well, what hope do we have? They didn't really mess with the audio, so it's still a lossy mono track that's based on the previous lossy mono tracks that actually date back to the mono track from the widescreen laserdisc from '94. It's still that same 5.1 remix given precedence, but at least it's not a fully revisionist one. But I wish it wasn't there because Leone intricately designed his soundtracks and they were mixed in mono, so you shouldn't really ever mess with those. But at least there's a version of the mono here. But what they did to the transfer, it's obviously, it was a brand new scan that was better than what was on the Blu-ray. That's obvious. And I think that's why most people see this, whether they've seen the film before or not, and they're saying, "Oh, well, it looked good to me, or it looked fine, or I think it's the best it ever
And you
looked."
can say
Because
that
on the
about most of these.
surface, you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
tell, you know, yes, the color timing is better because the Blu-ray definitely had color issues, which I thought that even when it was brand new, it was a bit too cold, and but
As I say, I don't think I ever picked it
it,
up for that reason.
the cost of getting this new release is so great in terms of what we've lost to get the few benefits because of how badly it's been handled is too great, because the film was basically hit with DNR once they finished this new scan and master, and it's inconsistent. So this is even before the compression issue. So it's not a matter of, oh, the compression is so bad you lose detail and stuff. That's just adding on to the crap Sunday.
Yeah.
Uh, because and there are moments in this where it turns into a smeary mess. There are moments where it looks okay. It's better in the interiors because that hides it more. But as soon as you get in the exteriors, and then that bad compression comes in, and that's me looking at it in Dolby Vision and HDR10 is worse. And all the exteriors, all the skies, which is unfortunately what I call a Paramount trademark. A lot of their bad encoding turns up whenever you have a shot of skies. You'll see compression noise mix in with the grain. That's all throughout the
Or
Indie
no grain.
Trilogy UHDs. Yeah. Yeah. Like there's a shot in Raiders of the Lost Ark where it's so bad over the Tannis dig. And I'm just like, how do people not see this?
Well, and I've seen it also get blown out in the sky shots too. And it's funny
Yeah.
you mentioned that because that's what I use a lot of times to reference where I'm at, where like, okay, what kind of work was done here? You, like you said, you look for something really brighter that you know is supposed to be a certain color or solid color. And if it's not doing anything or it's not moving, or you don't see the things that you know you're supposed to see that are inherent to film, then my brain automatically goes, okay, now something's up here. So then I'm re-going through it and trying to figure out what they've done because
Or
they've
when there's some
changed
grain
around.
left and it's stagnant
Oh,
and
those are
it's
the
just,
worst.
it doesn't quite go the awful. What kills me most is what I refer to as the frozen noise or frozen grain that sort of
Yeah,
halos around. And The Godfather is the worst example of that we've had yet. But I see it pop up every once in a while in things where there's some sort of transfer quirk or the encoding isn't as good as it could be. You might see a little flash of it here and there or something. But when you're looking at this transfer, and again, this is in Dolby Vision. Like even in the iconic opening, because you've got the big skies over the train station, the compression noise is mixing in with what grain was left over, and that grain is kind of stagnating, so it's not actually moving. And so, when Woody Strode walks across the platform
right.
and he walks out into the sky for the first time, it's like he's walking through a sort of noise soup of in ways. It's not as bad as it could be, but it's like of anything, you do this to not only a Leone film, but a Techniscope film, which is a particular format with quirks of its own. It's obviously not 35 millimeter anamorphic, but if people want a frame of reference, you look at the Kino SDR UHD of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's not perfect because it's still got the baked in color issues of the god awful Richard Vada Master, but it tried to tame those, and it used fan work and fan efforts to recreate the 1967 161 international release version, and to try and address the color timing issues as much as humanly possible with the stupid master they had. But that master was a 4K scan properly done. So the actual master itself, in terms of detail and grain structure and everything, is properly done. And that is a film with the same director of photography, the same format, some of the same locations in Almeria, Spain, you know, released in 1966. And then Once Upon a Time in the West was the next film they made together, also in Techniscope. Yes, it has a different visual style. Yes, it has different flourishes, but it's the same director, the same, a lot of the same locations, same director of photography, same format, 2 years apart, well, actually slightly less technically. So at least it should look similar to that. And that's only an SDR master. So when you compare them side by side, if people want a frame of reference, it's like, well, there's your night and day difference. But yeah, the just the practices of Paramount are so readily apparent on this release. The two new extras they put on, one's a basic intro, which tells you nothing. And then the other is a commentary from some podcast guys that doesn't tell you anything. And it's like, well, that's just kind of pouring salt in the wound. And then all the stuff about Scorsese and that it's the ultimate in physical media and audio and video quality, and it's clearly not. And they shoved it all onto a BD66, which already limits you. And this is a nearly 3-hour long film that they had already done unnecessary DNR to the image and degraded the image and not respected the film, not fixed the end music error. There's so many little things that just showed they simply don't care. And on top of that, Paramount likes to go in and mess with things. They love to mess with opticals. They love to mess with stuff that they shouldn't. And my biggest thing on that is how they went in and screwed and changed and tweaked and messed up every shot, every effect shot in the Indiana Jones trilogy has been manipulated. And people thought I was being too nitpicky on that. That they did it on the Star Trek films as well, and some people talked about that, but they did it on the indie films. That's just one of the things they do. And this is an example of not only where you have people who are making decisions who the archival preservation is not really first and foremost. It's cut with whatever their preferences are. And on top of that, on the inside of things, the actual disc manufacturing and encoding is also not designed to serve the film and serve the consumer. And they're also, if that was not bad enough, they're charging premium prices and trying to pass it off as not only a premium product, but film restoration and that it's something to be championed, and this is going to be the version in existence and circulation in perpetuity. So this is the one where it's just like, there have been bad Paramount releases before. There have been ones where it's just so ungodly terrible, like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, that everybody knows it's bad. But this is the one where it's every single aspect is just either boneheaded or incompetent or simply we don't care, and we think none of this is important. We just want your money, and we think you're too stupid to know any of this stuff or ask questions or know anything's are off or wrong or whatever. And if you say anything, then we're just going to act like you're some crazy person on the internet. And not to toot my own horn, but I started researching and digging into the Leone films 21 years ago. I wrote a letter to MGM in 2003 when I was 12 because I was like, why did you put the grotto scene back in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? And why did you make this horrible revisionist 5.1 audio mix? And I got back a letter saying, please don't write us, go away. So I have a long history with these films. So I admit I go into crazy details, but that's because nobody else is.
Yeah, I've been there a few times myself. So, but we're gonna start rounding out a little bit. I don't want to keep you too long.
Oh, no problem.
We got some super chats and stuff. We're gonna go through here with some questions and other comments. So let's see what you guys are talking about there out in the chat. I don't mean to ignore you, but I wanted to talk to Spencer as much as possible with the time we had, and who knows, maybe we'll get him back soon. We got Sean the Movie Man here, who's become a member. Thank you for that. Jan Eric Edvardsen, if I'm saying that right, sends in 50 Norwegian krona. And Lord knows Andre will correct me if I was wrong if he was here. Says there's a lot of 35 millimeter theatrical scans circulating in closed invite only forums like GoldenEye T2, Jurassic Park, Lord of the Rings. Some are even 4K open mat. Yes, this is true. And then we have Dr. Coffin Nails, who sends in 5 and says 4K 77 should be the standard. The first time I watched 4K 77, I almost wept. Same here. I felt like I was watching Star Wars for the first time in 40 years. Exactly. You know what's sadder, Dr. Coffin Nails, is they have scans of the negatives.
They have
George
everything archived. They have the alternate theatrical audio mixes on a hard, literally on the digital server. And but of course, how they would handle them or how they were done probably wasn't with quality control. So even if they did release them, it wouldn't be with the level of effort that they deserve. And 4K 77, I don't know if people realize that's not just a fan project. That's also the product of, over 20 years of fans working together on various different projects and gathering more research and basically helping to build this. And then of course with technology getting cheaper and more available and it moved from, we're doing VHS captures, we're doing laserdisc captures, we're working with the gout, the 2006 DVD master of the 93 laserdisc master. It kept going. And then Harmy's despecialized editions working from the 2004 master. So all of this stuff builds and builds and builds. And that 4K 77 is the ultimate product of that. And it's crazy to think, but also you learn a lot. It's a crash course. And I view all of this as, I went to film school. I didn't learn anything there. I got a worthless degree. I consider myself self-taught, and I considered this stuff my film school because I've learned more doing this. I've learned more from George Lucas making decisions like this than anybody.
Yeah. Well, and on that note,
True.
Jay Fraser sends in £2 or £2 and says, biggest offenders are Sam Raimi and James Cameron. Oh, no. George Lucas is like, here, hold my beer when it comes to that, as we're just talking.
And
George
then Cameron comes
loves his
back in
DNR.
and says,
Yeah.
hold my beer.
Yeah, they got to go back and forth. And because it was like, I thought American Graffiti was bad enough. I mean, honestly, I don't know. That might actually be, in my eyes, the bigger of the two, because the difference is James is just being lazy. George went out of his way to destroy what probably was a very well done scan, because they, like I said, did all those in like 6 or 8K when they did them. So
Oh,
the
but
original
they did the
files probably
digital
look amazing.
changes. They did
Yeah,
the digital changes and didn't even bother to cover them up, like
yeah,
and then the tearing apart the sound design and the color timing and the HDR handling and stuff. But at least they did a new scan. It's just
yeah.
about
But
the
they still
worst in
destroyed it.
terms of working from a new scan in the 4K realm, but he also didn't use all the crazy AI upscaling algorithms and basically open a new can of worms.
Fair, but
So
he still
that's
did like
that's
the
the
old school
difference.
bad. And then we
Yeah.
got another one that is the whole different kind of monster, and that's Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then with Lord of the Rings, it's in that sort of no man's land of you're locked to early digital effects, you're locked to early digital intermediates. If you want to do everything from scratch, you have to do a next generation style rebuild. And people don't want to do that.
which
And then should
is
you do that? And then I'm like, okay, preserve the original iteration as best as you can alongside whatever you want to do to then work with the digital shots and effects. It's just
most people are going to forgive a bit of a downgrade if when you go to a digital shot than if you're going to compromise the entire film. And that's what
yeah.
I feel like is happening to a lot of these films is they're choosing to compromise the entire film for like 10-30% of the film. Lord of the Rings is a good example because now there's some people who are not even convinced or are starting to call out the fact that they don't even think those films were rescanned now that they're looking
Well,
into it.
because they would have had digital intermediates back in the day that would have been limited, or a film mount of something. So it's possible they are simply working from that with a new higher res scanner version of that,
Not to
which is
mention all
already
the Jackson's
limiting yourself.
revisionist stuff that he
Yeah,
did.
so
Yeah.
but with anything in that sort of sticky situation, different people are going to approach it different ways, and 99% of the time they're not going to do the full next generation rebuild because they know that's not financially viable most of the time, and it's a lot of work. And even then, do you just upscale the effects as they were and have them be dodgy to most people? Or do you completely redo them? Do you tweak them? And people like to make tweaks as they go because they're like, oh, I never liked this, or I think it should be this way right now because I'm sitting
Yeah.
here in front of a grading monitor and I think it should be this way right now. And I might change my mind in 5 seconds, which is the James Cameron story. So, yeah, you're going to be stuck in that situation if you've got a film like that, simply because of when it was made. And really, it's just like having opticals back in the day. There was quality loss, and people will be like, "Oh, it always looked terrible when people were in cars and they had the back projection behind them." Well, there's a certain aesthetic to that, and that's how they had to make things. You know, if you had to cut to an optical, there's going to be quality loss. That. And then you quickly get over that. It's part of the process. So it's
That's
the
why a lot
same
of times they
thing.
shot that stuff in 70 millimeter too. So yeah.
Yeah, or they use VistaVision once they figured out, hey, if we use a higher quality stock, that will cut down on the generational loss and it will help to, patch in the seams.
Yep. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah, between those are probably the worst. And
Yeah.
George, I don't think we'll ever learn. And that's the other problem with the Star Wars films is I think he has it stipulated that they can't release the other versions
Yeah,
somehow.
that's the what always gets sort of touted around, and it seems like maybe, but there's no evidence that that's in writing anywhere.
I know, but the only reason I'll say that is because it's gotta be because you'd think Disney, as greedy as they are, would know that tomorrow if they
You would
were to
think.
announce that and they have a print because several directors and other people that I know have said they've gone and they've done special screenings at
They
Disney
ran that
with the
70
original
millimeter
print.
print. They
Yes.
ran a 70 millimeter print at a public screening. I think it was said it had one section that had damage, and it was like a 70 millimeter blow up that had been made like a year or two later and only run like once,
Yeah.
and just got put back on a shelf. And you know,
Well, and they also
it's
have all these because I can't remember who it was that said it, but they called bullshit on George Lucas himself. Because they're like, George said that the original film is lost and all this stuff.
or he
Bullshit. We
recut the
had to
negative
scan
for
it
the
all.
special
Yeah,
edition, or
exactly.
it's
That's
it's
it.
too far
That's it.
gone.
It's like it's too far gone. It's like bullshit. We had to rescan it every time for every edition. So I don't know what he's talking about. We have it all. It's
Even
all
yeah,
there.
yeah, it was
So
bad off
yeah.
in '97 when they did I think it was like a 1K scan for the special edition in '97, which was, kind of also hey, we're actually working on the prequels, but not admitting
Right.
it. Um,
Which is kind of what
but
Disney did for a while too. They used their old go ahead, finish. Sorry.
Oh, no, no, yeah, 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 you're right. But yeah, with what we have now, even things that were deemed unrecoverable, that's no longer a thing. Let's put it this way: if Warner Archive, the tiny small division inside Warner Brothers, could go and restore one of the big name titles that for decades was, this film is gone. It's gone. It is irrecoverable. The water damage is so bad, and the fading problems, everything is so bad. And they can say, you know what? We did it. So if Warner Archive was able to restore Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, the only other 3-panel Cinerama film, which means technically 3 times the work because you're restoring 3 films, and you have to worry about the Cinerama curve and all the stuff that goes along with that. If they were able to do that with the handful of guys who do the Cinerama restorations on their own, all that stuff about Star Wars goes out the window. It's like, yeah, no,
Well,
they were able to restore Brothers Grimm, which had been marked dead, for over 30 years. So yeah,
yeah,
that's not even an argument.
yeah, yeah. And then we got Jan Eric again, who sends in another 50 Norwegian kroner. Says another benefit of 35 millimeter theatrical scans. They often have the original optical stereo track embedded and not the revised ruined audio from the Blu-ray. Yeah, and when they do these, I prefer
Mhm.
they go to the negative. But I think they should do a side-by-side scan with whatever the best quality uh, release print or answer print they have
That's what they're
from that
supposed to
to
do.
yeah
You're
to
supposed
combine with
to
it. Yeah,
get as many best references as you can, and for a vintage film, if you can get multiple dye transfer Technicolor prints, because they did have some variants and some
yeah,
were made better than others, but you get as many as you can because the color doesn't fade. And if you have 4 or 5 of them, you're usually able to get a balanced reference. And then you also have interpositives. You check, you're supposed to check as much as you can. That's what I do when I do a video review, or if I'm trying to figure out about a film, and especially in the realms of audio, because audio never gets looked at, and it's so bad. It's the equivalent of the loudness wars in music, and people don't talk about it because it's not something they think about.
you know,
And it's so unbelievably bad.
as somebody with a little bit of a background in audio, it's not something I've noticed until more recently myself. Now, during the DVD age, I was probably just more bamboozled with the idea of where now I get to see all my favorite movies in surround sound because I always was a surround sound hog. I love my multi-channel stuff.
Mhm.
And sometimes I would rather just watch the movie in its new soundtrack. But I found myself more recently going back and back and back, especially if there was an older stereo mix. Going back to that mix, because like you said, I've noticed, and this has happened more so in recent years, where like with the older films, where you'll say that they'll try to fix them, but they'll end up taking something out in the process of destroying
Mhm.
it, and then they'll go and do the same thing again for the new release and destroy it even more.
Yep.
I've noticed that they are starting to screw around with some of these sound mixes so much that, like you said, we're in this third or fourth generation of them messing with them, that they've even stripped out some of the ambient sounds
Yes. Oh,
to where it's like,
there's one where they did a good job on the restoration side in terms of the detail and stuff. Film Foundation linked again, but if you go and look at the restored audio track on A Fistful of Dollars, which they did a new scan, and I guess they had the original stems, the quality of the actual the track itself is great and probably the best that exists, but the way it was recombined and the final mix that was done is so bad that the levels are all over the place. The music is too loud, and dialogue and effects are drowned out or missing. And I talk about that, and people think I'm nuts, and I'm like, it's right there that when you get to the opening title, the title music is so ridiculously loud, and then frequently you've got losing iconic lines, or some of the gunshots are no longer there, or the timing's off because they didn't take the time to actually match it. And I'm like, and I noticed that the first time I saw that master and heard that audio track, and I'm sitting there going, am I losing my mind here? Like, I know I've
No.
seen this film 1,000 times, but geez. And otherwise it sounds good. That's the thing. That's even when they do a good job on the front end, they can still screw stuff up.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's not what some of the problem is sometimes, that they either lose certain elements. Because I know, like, Robert Meyer Burnett, who we talked to quite often and is one of the regular panelists on the show, he worked on the restoration of TNG, and he talked about how much of a ordeal that was, finding audio tracks here, clips here, there, like they
Mhm.
missing an entire shot and then finding it in another episode somewhere, like just
And you gotta
strange
think
things.
that
So, like,
was,
yeah,
that was mixed for television. They were doing Dolby Surround, so those are all Dolby Surround Matrix mixes. And
yeah.
then when they did they did the DVD releases, those got 5.1 up mixes of those. So,
Mhm.
there's some
So for the
variance
new
there.
versions, though, they went for brand new 5.1 mixes. I think what Robert said they actually had the original stems, but yeah,
Yeah,
but
they did keep the originals and alternate, so you can. I was so happy they did that because, of course,
and that's what they
I'm
should
me.
do.
Yeah, they always should, always. It's not like it's difficult to do, but the trouble is they usually just grab whatever's on the shelf, and then they can't resist messing
A
with it.
great example of that is Superman. Why the hell did they do that? Like that.
Oh god.
I,
It took decades to get the 70 mm mix of Superman the movie back, because for years I just watched the letterbox laserdisc because I was like, the transfer is noisy as crap because this film is notoriously hard to transfer, but the audio mix is a 2.0 matrix track and it's amazing. And I've seen Superman theatrically. I know for a fact just how bad the 1978 Dolby Stereo mix is. It's probably the worst Dolby Stereo. It's one of the worst ever made because it
it
sounds like
was
flat
kind
mono
of
most of
rushed
the
like
time.
Star Trek. Yeah.
Yeah, and they did the mixes. They had to do them one at a time back in the day, but had to take the time to do it right. And they did the 70 mm mix as the premier one and best one. It's the best mixed one, because there's also a mono version that is lost to time because people don't think about preserving stuff. But then there was the 70 mm mix with the split surrounds. It was only used in a handful of engagements, and that was before Apocalypse Now. But on disc, you just had usually crappy versions of the crappy Dolby Stereo. And that's why Richard Donner and Michael Thal were like, oh, we must remix it. And they made the modernized mix with all the new effects that everybody hated for good reason. It wasn't the worst in the world, but it's like, if you guys had just used the 70 mm mix, which was on the laser disc, and because it sounded so good, I kind of figured, I'm like, well, this has got to be it. But then we got that first UHD pressing with the screwy master they've never fixed that had it as a lossy 5.1 track. And it's like, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. How did this happen? And it's like, I don't think they knew what it was, because then they did the second pressing and the box set. They've got a better version of the master they didn't use. Like there's like a version 2.0 of the Superman 4K master that fixes some of the problems. And they're like, no, we're not using
Yeah,
that.
that's what we were told. I think
And they
Robert
removed the
said it at the
70
time.
millimeter
Yeah.
track, which was the one unbelievably important thing
Because
about
originally we
that
were
first
supposed to get a
pressing.
brand new scan and version of
Yeah.
Superman 1. And yeah. And I don't understand. And also I would like, actually, Richard Donner's extended cut would be nice too in 4K, but I know we'll probably never get that.
Yeah,
But
and there's so much that needs to be done with those, and at the very least, George Feltenstein has said that he is trying to find the preview cut of Superman 4. They are
that'd be
actually
nice.
trying at the archive, because it did exist. It did get screened once for that test screening, and of
Mhm.
course there's the extended Japanese laser disc and
Right.
the not so good looking footage that they do on the DVD that they do have the source of, but it's so
Right.
ropey and so bad off and unfinished that they couldn't
It's all
make
marked
that
up
into a
too.
master.
Yeah.
But they are actually trying to do something with Superman 4. I wish they would do the
Yeah,
same
because
with
that
Batman
box set
Forever.
felt like, yeah. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, because that
Uh,
Superman box set just felt like, when you got it in your hands at
oh,
first, felt like it was like finally, and then like you said, once you start digging into it, you're like, a lot of this just feels like an afterthought, or it was just
yeah, and it was
a
overpriced.
crappy
They messed up
reselling
the
of their
audio on
old.
Superman 4. How do you do that? They screwed up the score, which is the one thing everybody agrees is great about Superman 4.
Yeah.
and I'm a person who doesn't, think Superman deserves all the hate it gets, but still, yet how do you mess up? How?
Yeah, compared to some of the other superhero films we've gotten, Superman 3 and 4 are much better than most. But,
Yeah.
like, that's why I try to remind people on our daily shows. It's like, "You guys, we were spoiled by Marvel. You gotta remember, most comic book movies suck."
Yeah, or
Like
they got manipulated. I've been trying to see if I could get Batman Forever put back together since I was a little kid, and I started finding all the bits and bobs of why are all there these extra scenes in the comic? Oh my god, the novelization's a completely different story.
Right.
What the heck happened?
Yeah, I don't
And
know if we'll ever get a that'd be nice if we could get a full-fledged, re
I've asked a bajillion times, it's like at least let us have the one of the 2 work prints that are floating around or all of the bits and bobs that you haven't officially released, something, anything, because it was altered
Yeah, because 'cause I'm
significantly.
not convinced the version that Kevin Smith screened wasn't just a recut of the footage they had on the DVDs.
Well,
But,
the DVD
supposedly
extra footage was some bits taken from a work print,
yeah,
and the one that Kevin Smith screened was
that
somebody
work
had
print
gotten
or
the one of the actual work prints that was, like,
oh, okay.
transferred from VHS with time code, and they had just spliced in the footage from the 4K master for all of the footage that conformed to the theatrical cut.
Gotcha.
So it was basically a cobbled together version, but I still haven't even gotten to see that or the actual um, work print version. It's I know enough that I know it's not going to fix every issue that people have with the film. But the original structure being restored, the full subplots being restored, it makes the movie make more sense. And it's the stuff I've always
Yeah.
picked up on. If you look at it closely, because most people just write it off, or they say, they lump it in with Batman and Robin. So there's more there if you want to dig into it. But if they were able to
Well,
actually put back the actual original structure and the way it was shot, you know, that would go a long way.
I've actually found a newfound, appreciation for Batman and Robin in more recent years, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I think I did the only positive fair commentary of the film that's out there because I'm such a nerd. I do my own audio commentary. So if you want to hear
We've done
somebody
some.
try to go through the production of the film and explain what went wrong and give it its fair due and talk about the good things in it as well, I did that. So
Well, Raven in the writing desk has been a member for 4 months. Thank you for that. And then Wolfman Hart or Wolfram Hart 79 sends in 4.99 and says, "Speaking of Paramount, when do you think all the Friday the 13th will get a 4K?" Well, we were supposed to get part 2 September last year, and they never released it. They have 4K scans of the first 4 or 5 films. I think it is. Can't remember if it's 4 or 5. You'd have to go back to the Shout Factory box set to see which one where they stop with the scans. I wish they would do them. It'd be nice. I don't know how much of a fan you are of these kind of films. I mean, I'm
well, you would
not
think. I mean,
guilty
they're obviously
pleasure.
going to make money.
Yeah,
I,
but
I I'm
the
thinking
first film
maybe.
has such problems on that 4K release. I don't
Oh
know if
yeah.
you heard about that, but
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
of course. It's
They
why do you
even
think
missed the
Paramount is the
original
P word?
Flash. Like, here's one that
It,
was funny is beyond all the other problems, when the title Friday the 13th comes up, they miss the Flash. The white it's
you're
gone.
talking about the people who colored the planet Mars blue in War of the Worlds and said it was fine
That's the way it's
and
supposed
it's
to
not a
be.
problem. And of course, didn't give us the original
And
audio.
Bill
So the
Hunt and
UHD
Criterion are
is
like,
worse than
"No."
the Blu-ray. And
Well, at least the upside of that is I will give that one, that's at least the Ben Burt remix of the original soundtrack, but it's the AI split up soundtrack, so
yeah, and
they
it's
did
it's Ben
sweeten some
Burtt
things,
using
but,
his
like,
sonic wizardry, and
yeah.
it's great as an experiment.
But
But
you
you
still should have the
don't
original there, what the hell? And
and,
Paramount used to be good at that. Like, I go back to my old Paramount DVDs, and you know what I'm talking about. They always made sure they had the original stereo or mono track with their new 5.1 mix every
yeah, because they
time.
were usually just reusing their Laserdisc elements, so they just recycled it, but at least they made sure it was there. Yeah, oh, yeah, for me, all the studios and labels, depending on where they last, they're like different entities for each format. So when I think of Paramount during the Laserdisc days, I'm like, yeah, they were pretty good. weren't as into it as some of the others, but they did quality work. Paramount in the DVD days, they got to doing even less and less releases before they cut off entirely. But they did some solid stuff, but they mostly recycled Laserdisc stuff. It is kind of hit or miss, but when they put the effort in, it was there. Modern Paramount is literally the worst.
Yeah, like
literally, they are just unbelievable, and it gets a pass most of the time, and I'm just like, what are we doing here?
They don't get to pass my bridge very often. Like, I don't generally, nope.
Oh, they never for me.
Not very, like, once in a while there's a title they get through. Like I said, Major League is a more recent
where
one that I
it
saw that
somehow
was
turns out okay.
amazing. Although I think a strike against that, I don't think they have the original stereo track on that. Now that I think about it.
Oh yeah.
Beverly Hills Cop, it looks good. The first one, I haven't watched 2 and 3 yet, but again, I don't know if they have the original stereo track on that one again.
They screwed up 48 Hours.
Oh,
the compression is a mess, and that film has been cursed on video. Every master looks screwy.
Nobody can tell me what's wrong with Another 48 Hours. I don't know if you noticed this or not either, but about
we can't get the director's cut of Another 48 Hours.
33 minutes into
Hill
the
is
movie,
still around.
Do you notice it too? 33 minutes into the movie, it's like we go from the negative to some inner positive or something for the rest of the film. It's like, what happened here?
I'm trying to remember, because
it's like 38 minutes into the movie, all of a sudden it cuts to like a much lesser quality version of the film. I'm like, did they fuck up and put up the Blu-ray master or something here? Because this looks horrible.
It wouldn't surprise me. I remember there was some.
What did they screw up on 48 Hours? Because I didn't catch that. But yeah, the first one.
I'm gonna review it, so I'm gonna do a rewatch. But
okay.
For whatever reason, those films, like the transfer history, like every format release, like Another 48 Hours is usually okay, but for whatever reason, 48 Hours, like the Laserdiscs aren't that good. The widescreen remastered Laserdisc wasn't that good. The first DVD was a port of that, so it didn't look very good.
Looked like ass.
Then they did the remastered widescreen DVD, and that wasn't super great, but at least it was anamorphic. And then the Blu-ray was a super crappy version of that. And then we got this UHD where it's like, yeah, it's better, but it's also, it could look better, and it's got tons of compression problems, and it's got the 5.1 remix, and you're like, and then we can't get the restored version of the sequel, which was significantly longer, and Walter Hill was mad about it and still mad about it that it got recut. So they had him do one of those talking head extras. So they did a 4K scan. Couldn't you had actually get
I don't know,
whole film out there?
I can't wait for your review, because once you rewatch 2 again, maybe you'll notice what I did too. Because like the movie looks fine, at least for the most part, outside of their normal issues. And it's either 33 minutes or 38 minutes. It's in the middle of a scene too. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, from that point on, it's like none of the rest of the film came from the negative. And I don't know what. I've tried asking Bill Hunt about it. He has no idea.
That reminds me of a really bad problem that's never been fixed on a Blu-ray. If you ever seen the Blu-ray of Tequila Sunrise that Warner put out?
No,
it literally does that, and it's totally screwed up. And that is one of the most gorgeously shot 80s films, because Conrad Hall shot that. And why? That's one it's been on the top of my list for, can Warner actually do a 4K scan and revisit this, and hopefully not foobar it completely, because that Blu-ray is actually defective. It literally drops in quality. So it's like, well, I'd rather just watch it on Laserdisc or DVD, actually.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll see what I'm talking about this time, because it feels like it dumps down to a Blu-ray all of a sudden, or it'd be like really horrible quality. Hitchhiker 42 sends in £2 and says, I want to buy a new 3D TV, but no maker makes them. Yeah. Which
and
I don't understand.
So many great restorations that they're still being done by the 3D Film Archive, and you can't watch them.
And I don't see why it would be so difficult for them to do in the day of 4K, because back when I had bought mine, like that was the whole thing, is it was basically like 2 TVs in one, right? Like, so now you have that with 4K basically. Like, I think it would just be like a software update basically. Like, I don't understand. Like, why you
They
can't do
there's some
passive 3D.
extra work that would have to go involved, but it would require them wanting to do it, and since the 3D fad died, it just dropped off dramatically. But then there's
Yeah.
another issue because, yes, they were doing 3D film restorations and stuff, but some of those, they actually screwed with stuff. Like, the big one, Universal literally changed the stereo window on Creature from the Black Lagoon. They tried to make it pop out effects constantly, and that is one of the great 3D films that's about subtle usage. So if you have a 3D TV and you watch that, they moved the what's called the stereo window, so everything's trying to come out at you, and there's misaligned shots in there all over the place. So they changed stuff, they altered the film, and then they didn't even get stuff right, and then they royally screwed up the restoration of the sequel that was done by the 3D film archive. Never They did a fix that didn't fix anything. So that's one of the great foobar discs. So even 3D films at times
Yeah.
had revisionism applied and stuff, and I didn't realize it
Yeah.
until I got a 3D TV and finally got to look at those versions, and I put on Creature from the Black Lagoon, and I'm like, "What is going on? Something is really weird here." Like, I've seen it in Anaglyph before, which is a terrible version of 3D, like the super cheap version, but, I know it's not supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be you're looking like it's like you're supposed to be looking through a window, looking out, especially in the underwater shots. And if you look at that 3D Blu-ray, everything's floating. It's coming out at you. It's been because they literally changed it to try and make it more. Hey, look at me, and
Makes me
it
wonder
wasn't
if there's
like
some
that.
other ones they did that too, because I've noticed that on
Yeah.
some older films where there's a lot of misalignment. So yeah, that
Yes.
would make sense. So yeah, the other thing, Hitchhiker, is a lot of projectors still handle it though.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't know
the
if that's an
workaround
option for
now.
you, but
But
yeah.
then projectors are usually behind 4K TVs and OLEDs in terms of they can't quite hit the same peak levels, and
Mhm.
to get really good performance, you have to jump up
Yeah.
way high in price brackets.
Otherwise, there's Oculus Rift or whatever, some kind of VR system.
There's an ability to do that, but it's still because it's not designed for it. It's
Still
kind of
compromised, yeah.
yeah.
But that's your best options at this point. I have two TVs for that reason. I have a plasma and
Yep.
a passive 3D just sitting in storage just in case. And then we got Richard Curtis here who sends in 20 pounds. Well, thank you very much. That's very generous. Says, I love Superman 3 as a child, and I still do. Uh, and that woman being turned into a robot was terrifying. Hell yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's one of like the all-time, for whatever reason, it gets everybody.
It does. Spider-Man 3 is the fourth best Spider-Man film. And I like Amazing Spider-Man 2 more than the bland, boring first, although it was the best Stan Lee cameo. Oh, I couldn't get into the Amazing films,
I
but
have a
I'm glad you liked
controversial
them.
opinion about Spidey films. I have to admit, I couldn't get into the amazing ones either. I'm like, okay, at least Spidey is more of his usual smartass self, but everything else, I'm just like, no, this
He's
is
on the phone too
Sony.
much.
Sony's got to make something so they don't lose the rights. Like, it's like I know this while I'm watching it, and I know some people like him, and that's fine.
Should be just
And
called the
and
Spider-Man rights retainer.
yeah. And I still really like the first of the Raimi films, although and I think it is better than 2, and I still like 2. But for me, I felt no film really got the tone of Spidey quite right, and I'm not even a diehard Spidey fan. I would consider myself more of a passing Spidey fan. But for me, the best Spider-Man movie ever made is the first Insomniac game, because they nailed the tone and they took creative risks and they incorporated some stuff from different comic arcs and they made it work. And the dramatic structure, everything. Like, you can literally watch the cutscenes, stitched together on YouTube. And I think it's a more consistent and a more Spidey feeling experience overall, beat for beat, than all of the films put together. But I know that's a very not common opinion. But even when I was playing it, I'm like, how did they do this? Like, this is legitimately, I felt it was, like, better thought out, and you could tell that people really thought about, what can we do? How do we respect the legacy? And let's take some risks. Let's do some different stuff at the same time, but not lose the core identity of the characters and things. So I just that was the best Spidey experience I'd had since I was a little kid, really.
Yeah, I remember there was an era there, especially like the PS3 era, where there were some of those games that would compete story-wise with some actual films, I felt.
Yeah.
But well, we've caught up on all the super chats. Now, is there any Blu-rays that are coming up that you're looking forward to, or the ones that you're dreading?
I have a plug.
I figured.
This is not sponsored, but this is so ridiculously good, and it's their entry into the US that I'm like, so this is one that I'm actually reviewing, and again, I I've never gotten sponsorship. I've never gotten a screener or review copy. This is not me. This is literally me saying this is so good that and such an important film that has needed this for so long, and it's so cheap, and it's these guys coming to the US for the first time. This is already disc of the year candidate across the board. This is every single aspect of this is what should be done on every release. Every film should be treated this way. And right now it's being sold for like $19. The Eureka release of the silent masterpiece, The Cat and the Canary, is out. This is the Museum of Modern Art restoration. This is the backbone. This is the film that literally starts the Universal horror canon. Every element that we associate with Universal horror starts here, from the Gothic sets of Charles D. Hall. This was directed by Paul Lenny, one of the great silent directors of German Expressionism. And he starts stuff here that starts the ball rolling. This is one of the most beautifully inventive, quirky films of the silent era. It's a horror comedy. It was based on the play of the same name in the haunted house sort of genre. And a lot of what this is doing sort of became ingrained in pop culture as cliches. And the biggest selling point, I think, for people who aren't into classic horror, maybe, if you are a Scooby-Doo fan and you ever wondered where the sort of genre started of quirky characters in a spooky old house type environment, you have to go back to the, at least the sort of haunted house genre of plays that were on Broadway in the teens and the 20s. And of them that got turned into films like The Bat and stuff, The Cat and the Canary is the most accomplished and visually stunning. This is full of flowing, moving camera work, incredible angles. They did the what Citizen Kane famously did of digging a hole in the studio floor to put the camera down lower to get these crazy angles. Paul Lenny was doing that here. And when you see this film, it's literally the birth of Universal horror. But this is the Eureka label's first US release. It's currently under $20 right now. It's got beautiful artwork, and this is the Museum of Modern Art restoration. It's absolutely stunning, and this film has been cursed by decades of crappy public domain versions of that are not even complete or in terrible quality. And it's absolutely stuffed with supplements. It has 2 audio commentaries. So this is one of those that's worth its weight in gold. And I've been hoping somebody would release this restoration because I've waited 2 years to see it. And I'm so glad Eureka were the ones who did it, because they've been doing great work with the newer Universal horror masters that Universal has made. They've done great releases, but you had to import them because they were region B, and they were a lot fancier and better made than the overpriced shout versions we got here. But this is the release I wanted to plug because I just finished it and I'm almost done with the supplements, and I'm just like, and I try to get people encouraged to, I try to encourage people to look at silent cinema, because I know it's such a niche thing nowadays. It's such a hard sell for people, but this ticks so many boxes, and it's one of the most important films for the development of the horror genre that simply ever was. And just after this, Paul Lenny went and made The Man Who Laughs, which is one of the great silent masterpieces, which Eureka's also released, but that's Region B. But that, of course, is the film that is essential for Batman fans, because that's where Conrad Veidt as Gwynplaine has the frozen rictus grin that inspired the creation of the Joker. So there's many branching points. I say all this stuff to try and get people to look at a
I didn't
silent
even know
film.
most of that, so there you go.
Mhm.
I guess I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, and like I
Um,
said, it's currently $20 or less. Like I think on Amazon it's like $19 right now. It's they're literally giving it away. And it's got, again, 2 audio commentaries, multiple extras, full on booklet essay, beautiful artwork, slipcover, everything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, looking forward to your review on that. Then we got Richard Curtis sending in another 10 and says, I don't at all love the Amazing Spider-Man films. I just prefer the dumb, over the top second to the reboot, to the bland reboot. That was the first. Garfield was pretty good. Spider-Man was in no way Peter Parker as I've ever known him. Yeah. Yeah. That was kind
I
of
can
probably
say that. Yeah.
yeah, he was too cool to be Peter. That was that was part of the problem there.
What was it?
I
That
think.
skateboarding montage in the first one, and I'm just like, oh no.
He's always on the phone.
Yep.
That was what I noticed about the
Everybody's
movies.
on the
Constantly
phone.
on the phone. It's like,
It's getting to be an old adage now, but cell phones wrecked screenwriting because you
kind of.
can't have dramatic problems because somebody's going to pull out a phone.
But then again, I watched Departed the other day, and I'm like, this movie managed to do it with phones. What's their excuse?
Yeah, it's just a lot harder. You got to work at it.
Yeah, and this Transformer thing. I don't know if you saw this. People were talking about it because I was thinking maybe we were getting close to getting a Blu-ray release of the Transformer TV show because they had a 40th anniversary celebration here this last week. A lot of people walked away from it very disappointed. Now I haven't got any confirmation from anybody yet how the actual transfers looked in theaters, but the experience sounded like it was very lackluster. But
Well, that's the unfortunate part of
yeah,
99% of US theaters, especially chain theaters. There's no quality in presentation. It just doesn't
yeah,
exist.
yeah. Richard Curtis sends in 5 and says Eureka 88 Films, Arrow, and Second Sight are cult film distributors. I try to keep my chats relevant, but time and my wandering mind. Well, that's the beauty of this show, Richard, is that there's so much to talk about, and I'd love to talk to Spencer for another 3-4 hours, but I've got another show coming up here in a little bit, and I'm sure he's got things he's got to do. And we went a little longer than I initially anticipated, but I want to thank Spencer so much for your time, and hopefully we get some time again real soon to talk even
Absolutely,
more.
yeah.
And honestly, I'd love to have you back on a regular 4K4U panel from time to time if that's possible too. But
Would love
why
to,
don't you
yeah.
guys check out his channel because he covers all kinds of stuff, and not just movies, but you've done book reviews and other things too. So, is there anything else you want to plug that you have coming up here at all?
Well, I'm trying to now catch up with my UHD reviews because I've kind of got my player kind of going in some iteration. So I have at least a small backlog of those. So but it takes me so long because I have to do all kinds of research and then record and edit and all that stuff. So hopefully I can get some of those. The big one is my Conan review that I was almost ready and then my player died. So I've got those coming up. I'm continuing to do book videos and some of my other interests. I just finally started. I've been doing an ongoing series about going through the original Hardy Boys books, one book at a time, and comparing the original 1920s and 30s texts that were rewritten in the 50s and 60s and sometimes completely changed. So I've been doing a comparison reread of each book. But I've got some other book series that I'm going to do a similar thing. And I just started my one for the James Bond novels because Bond is my passion. So I always wanted to do a very, as one of my very detailed analysis videos about the books because they don't get talked about as much as the films. So I just did my first one on Casino Royale, and so that's going to be an ongoing series because I guess I hadn't given myself enough work to do. But that's kind of what I've got going at the moment. A number of Blu-ray reviews and the big one that's come along that kind of had made me have to put everything to the side, and it's going to be one of my big giant epics. Is this guy right here because my reviews of the Leone UHDs so far have been long and detailed, and I have to go into the long history of them. But this is a new low, and I gotta address the Paramount situation and stuff. And if people have seen some of my frustrations with in my reviews of the other Leone films and some of my frustrations with Paramount that have led me to make increasingly convoluted goof intros, this is I think my goof intro for this is probably going to be 20 minutes long. I mean, because I
Well,
started just like writing down ideas, and it's just I can't stop because it's just so bad. So yeah, that's the big one I'm working on now. So hopefully, what you see behind me will be coming soon. The oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. This is fantastic, and the oh dear God, what have you done? So two different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it's brought up again. Was Conan any good? And I thought it looked great. I'm glad to hear that you thought so too.
Yeah.
I knew if there was going to be any problems, they'd come from you'd be the one to know about it.
Yeah,
Um,
there's one or two very, very, very extraordinarily minor quirks, but nothing that's, super crazy or something. There's one tiny spot in Conan the Barbarian that people have talked about a little bit on forums where there's just the tiniest little color shift in one shot that then runs through the rest of the scene, and it's one of those that you can kind of blink and you miss it. Um, I'm still trying to kind of run that down to figure out if maybe that's somehow tied to the original element. Like maybe if that was just a quirk of that didn't carry through on past releases because it wasn't really visible on like the DVD and stuff. That's like the only major thing I know of. I've captured the audio, so I'm going to do my comparison with the Laserdisc and stuff. I just have to try and find a version of Destroyer that because the Laserdisc is analog only and the Japanese import is expensive. So I'm actually having to go and try and find a sealed VHS copy so then I
mm,
can buy that, capture the hi-fi track because that'll be better than the analog US Laserdisc track, and then compare that. And you have to find a sealed VHS copy so that way you don't have any degradation from it being run, and
right.
try to not pay sealed VHS prices these days. And I buy VHS tapes on eBay just to check their audio because I'm insane. But
But you go
but
the
the
extra
scary
mile.
part is I started doing this because I found cases where there was an old VHS tape that was better than anything else. And I'm like, oh my God.
Well,
Oh
another thing I
no.
wonder that if you run into this problem on the old VHSs is when they would do the process stereo mix on some of the older films when they were in mono.
Oh, the Warner reprocessing for stereo on some titles, like Bullet and Dirty Harry are the ones that always kill me because they've been that way only the very initial Laserdisc and beta and tape releases are mono in analog, and everything else is reprocessed for stereo, and they've been stuck that way ever since. And it's like, why? And
We'll
the
even have some modern films they've done it to. I couldn't believe.
oh yeah,
Like I know it's a Fox title, but Nerds. I didn't know Nerds was in mono. Revenge of the Nerds.
Fox has been
Until
doing
I got the
stereo
Blu-ray.
remixes. They did it
Yeah.
all the time
And
on
it's a
DVD.
horrible stereo remix, and I didn't realize it until that Blu-ray came out, and I went back to my old DVD and listened to it. I'm like, all these years, I didn't realize this is a reprocessed stereo mix.
Yeah, I don't know why Fox did that.
They
They
did the
did
same
that
thing for MASH and a
all
bunch of
through
other
the
movies too.
DVD
Yeah.
era, and then some of those carried over, and if they just took one track, they might take that. And on the DVDs of, like, especially catalog titles, it would be a classic, and in the menu on the DVD, it would have mono and stereo, and you're like, "This wasn't a stereo film," and all of them were like that. But then I found a Fox case recently where all the DVD was atrociously bad for sound. The Blu-ray was a little bit better, but still terrible. And that was on Laura, one of the most iconic noirs of all time. That, of course, is out of print because the Fox library is tied up in Disney. And it's like, it's only Laura, and the Blu-ray master isn't that great either. It needs a 4K scan desperately. But the old Laserdisc from the late 80s, that's a standard CB, it's just straight Fox release. Not only does it have the extra scene, so it's the slightly extended version, that audio track is left alone, and it's a PCM track. That is so unbelievably better than the DVD and Blu-ray. It's one of the biggest cases of overzealous noise reduction I've ever found. The worst is for a few dollars more. That was where I had to save the film audio from VHS, and people helped me undo the time compression because it was terribly time compressed. But even that way, the fidelity difference was staggering because MGM noise reduced that audio track at least 2 or 3 times to an insane degree. So
Yeah.
if you listen to it on like even the Kino UHD, it sounds like you're listening to the film over a game of telephone with the tin can with the string tied to it, like you're a little
Mm,
kid, and you hear that sort of. That's the quality difference.
no bass at all. And yeah.
No, anything. It's just
Yeah.
so tinny. It's just like everything is scrunched down, and they
Mm.
took all the detail out. Um, And so, yeah, I had to capture a 1984 VHS hi-fi track and get people to help me undo the time compression because that was an uncut print they used too.
Oh,
So, and of course, Kino is missing frames on theirs, and they advertise it's complete, and they couldn't even be bothered to make sure it was complete. So
mm.
the Leone stuff never ends, so that's why this is
Oh
going to
yeah,
be long.
I hear you. And yeah, I guess we got an answer on the Transformer event. They showed the show in a window boxed fake TV.
Oh,
Well, they would
jeez.
have been in 4:3 anyway, but
But
if you say the
especially
image
in
quality
modern
was
theaters, it would be
terrible,
pillar box too, because
yeah.
yeah. Oh, jeez.
See, and I was thinking this was a sign they actually went back and scanned, if anything. I know they may not have the original negatives for Transformers, but they should at least have some 16 millimeter television
Well, if it was
that
like
they
a
would have
Fathom
sent off,
Events
or
thing, it could
yeah,
be
that's what it was.
anything, and they are
Yeah,
notoriously bad for technical problems. So that's
yeah,
another
that
reason
sounds
why I
bad.
avoid them like crazy because they've just thrown up terrible versions that are usually, even worse than like if it's an old master that you have at home on Blu-ray that's a crappy Blu-ray, the Fathom version will be even worse.
Well, and yeah, Sander, what they did a lot of times back in the day when they would do like a big 70 millimeter blow up and stuff like that, they would sometimes do new mixes, and that's kind of what Spencer was talking about earlier, specifically for
Oh, all
Superman.
of them were
But
had
like,
to
yeah,
they
the
were because they had to be in 6-track magnetic stereo, but most the reason why that's 4.0, most of the actual masters were actually 4-channel, left channel, right, surround. That's how Star Wars was, and when they
yep,
did the 6-track version, they didn't really mix for those extra 2, screen channels because it was 5 screen channels across the front of the hall, and they would just use that for extra ambiance. And on Star
mhm,
Wars, Dolby was like, "Hey, we can just put low frequency in here." And that's what birthed what was termed the baby boom, and then that got further refined, and that was like the first sort of inklings of an LFE channel. But if you
mhm,
go back to this stuff, a lot of them at their core are actually a 4-channel mix. And the same thing in the Dolby Stereo era, they would be a 4-channel mix that would then go through matrixing to have stereo with then the ability to then decode out that 4.0. But
yep,
if you went to the actual source, like what they did on RoboCop, that Arrow actually gave you the option to hear the original 2.0 matrix track and then actually hear the actual 4-channel source master in discrete. And when they did matrixing, that actually caused differences. So you should have both, even if you have the source version. So
well,
most
yeah,
films were actually a 4-channel source, unless they were a full 70 millimeter roadshow from the beginning. Then they had
yep,
the full legitimate 6-track, and
yep,
most of those tracks get messed with because
yep,
they had dialogue panning. They were much more realistic, and dialogue panning is a no-no in modern sound. So they
yep.
actually remix it so everything's center locked. 2001 was stuck
Sometimes
that way for years.
it depends on the movie, and how bad they get with that. Because sometimes I will choose the modern mix, but it just depends. Very rarely. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, and that's my understanding too. And sometimes when you have the Matrix being mixed down to 2.0, because what it is basically, for those who don't understand, is you have a system that is taking anything that is central or in both channels and putting it in a center channel, and it'll take a left and a right with whatever left and right sounds that are coming out, and then whatever's out of phase in the mix will come through the surround channels because it
Yeah, it
can
was a
decode
mono
that way.
surround and a
Yeah.
center channel. Yeah. And it
So
was
all they're doing is taking those other channels and putting them out of phase in the sound, so then the processor knows how to
Yeah,
process the
so if
sound.
something was screwed up or a theater was only stereo, you'd still get the full signal. So it was wonderfully backward compatible.
Yep.
But you had to make sure you had everything major important in the stereo mains. Otherwise, if stuff went out, things would be screwy.
Exactly. So yeah, with that, I think we're gonna wrap this up here. I want to thank you again so much, Spencer, for being here today.
Oh, that was
Um,
wonderful. Glad to be here.
I think we got this one already. Yeah, yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. Yep. I just wanted to double check, but thank you so much. If you can find, also, you're on Twitter. Follow you there, I'm sure, because the way YouTube alerts people. I don't know if you share your links on Twitter as well. That's what I try to tell people to do.
Yeah.
Also, don't
Kind of have to
forget, I have
bounce
another
back and
channel
forth.
as well. I got to remind people. Now, do you have any other channels besides your main one, or is there anything else you're doing? Or
No, but the YouTube algorithm doesn't like it when you do multiple topics. So I don't know. I don't know if I should start a separate channel just for all my book reviews and stuff. But I just do everything on my one channel, and I haven't done anything differently yet. But I've thought about it.
yeah, and so with that, I want to thank you once again, and we're gonna get on out of here, and hopefully we'll have you again back real soon. Thank you, Spencer, and take care, guys out there in YouTube land. See you soon.